What are you meant to do when you're burnt out? Take a break, obviously. Today we're going to be talking about why that may not actually be the best idea. Now, I want you to imagine this. This is the story of every burnt-out student. You've got a goal in mind, you are highly motivated, this big, new, sparkly goal. Maybe it's to get a certain exam score or get into a university that you want. Maybe it's to get a promotion. And you're super motivated and you channel all of that motivation and energy into creating a great schedule and this awesome to-do list. You're feeling good, you get down and you're studying and you spend all day and all night studying. You do this again and again, and the outcome is potentially either good in that you were able to reach a certain goal, like you got a test result that you wanted, or it was not so good and you didn't get the result, or you did, but at what cost? Maybe you sacrificed all of your friends, all of your hobbies, and all of your sleep to get that, and that's not really sustainable. But as goals go, there's always the next goal. So we set our sights on this new goal, goal number 2. And again, we're renewed with motivation. Although if we didn't do so well, we may be feeling a little bit uncertain, we may be feeling a little bit anxious, a little bit insecure. But either way, we're gonna double down, we're gonna try even harder. We're not gonna let that setback slow us down. No, we are driven, we're motivated, we're gonna push through to reach this next goal. We're gonna create a new schedule, a new to-do list. We're gonna study again all day, all night. We're gonna repeat that and hope that we get the right outcome. But what if you don't? What if you continually seem to get an outcome that is just below what you wanted or far below what you wanted? What if every time you achieve the outcome, it never feels like it's sustainable? That produces a lot of frustration, a lot of demotivation, and it frankly makes you very tired. Now, this is the way that most people go about trying to achieve their goal. However, this is not the best way to achieve it because there is fundamentally a problem here, and that is that motivation and productivity are coupled. So here's what that looks like. We know based on extensive research around motivation and behavioral psychology that motivation is influenced by multiple factors. It's not A plus B equals C kind of equation. There are lots of components that contribute towards your overall feeling of motivation. And there's extrinsic or intrinsic motivation and all these different angles that we can take on it. But fundamentally, because there are so many things that influence motivation, it is essentially unheard of. It doesn't really happen to the human being for motivation to stay constant. Motivation is often not a constant, just plateaued thing. Motivation goes up and it goes down. That's just the nature of human beings. And so the problem here is that if motivation is going up and down, then not only are we feeling sometimes really hyped up on some days, and then on some days we're not. If our productivity is coupled to that, that means that our productivity is also going up and going down as well. And so that is less desirable. But here's where it gets really dangerous, is that when your productivity is a little bit lower, let's say that this is the minimum level of productivity that you would need to achieve your goal, then in these areas, we're actually not able to achieve our goal. And so what happens is that here we experience what we might consider a failure. And what that will do is that actually reduces our motivation. So instead of our motivation tracking along like it did before, instead what's gonna happen is that we have a little bit less motivation. And so we spend a little bit more time down here, which means that this is now leading to failure, and that reduces our motivation even more and more and more. And so what happens is that because we inherently have motivation linked to our productivity, and because inherently motivation goes up and down, then therefore productivity also goes up and down. And if our results aren't always good, that means that each failure can reduce our level of motivation. And so we end up in this cycle, this very dangerous spiral where we're putting in effort and we're trying and trying and trying, but we're not getting the result that we want. That demotivates us further, that causes us to put in more effort into a system that is fundamentally not working to our advantage. And then our results are not as good. And so we're getting, worse and worse and worse. Our motivation is still going up and down, but the overall trend is that it's getting lower and lower, and eventually we just don't have enough energy left to put in. We don't have enough effort, we're too demotivated, and we're entering into a situation where we conventionally call it burnout. What happens when you're already here? What happens if you've been riding this cycle and you've been kind of just scraping by and summoning all your willpower on a daily basis to scrape through, and now you're here, rock bottom, burnt out, you can't even be bothered getting up and thinking about studying, let alone actually going and studying? Well, this is a bad place to be in, and the best thing to do here is to avoid getting here in the first place. However, if you are already here, the conventional advice is usually to take a break, to do some yoga, to do some meditation, to pick up some more hobbies and play some sports. And the thing is that all of these things will help. Yes, it will help you. It will help you to relax and recover and take a break and reset. But it's not really going to solve the problem. See, back when I worked as a doctor in the hospital, one of the most common things that I would see are people that have substance addiction or are smokers, and it's part of your duty to try to convince them not to smoke or take these illicit substances that may be bad for their bodies. And we knew, and we've always known, that when you convince someone to stop engaging in a certain type of behavior, that if you discharge them from hospital and they go back and all of their friends are still smoking or taking whatever substances, it's just a matter of time before they pick up that habit again. And so what we know is that behaviors are really heavily influenced by the environment. And similarly, the way that we feel and the situation that we're in has a strong influence on the way that we will be able to conduct ourselves, the behaviors we have the ability to engage in, and the way that that makes us feel. So if you hype yourself up, you watch some motivational videos, you relax and you go on a holiday for a few weeks, and then you come back into the same environment, in the same setting, with all the same pressures, approaching things in the same way that led to the burnout in the first place, it's just a matter of time. It's inevitable that you will just burn out again. And the problem really is that it's much faster the second time, and it's even faster the third time, and it's even faster the fourth and the fifth and the 100th time, to the point where you take an entire month off and you get back into work, and 4 days into your first week, you're already thinking, I need another holiday. And I'm sure many of you will be able to relate to that. And so there are two different perspectives at looking at this kind of problem here. One is to fundamentally decouple our sense of productivity from motivation, so that even if our motivation is fluctuating up and down, we're able to keep our productivity relatively high. And this relies on us building really good habits so that we don't need motivation to be productive. We are unlinking the relationship between motivation and productivity. And that is a very valid strategy to use, and I encourage you to use it. It's what I teach in my program. It's what I talk about in many of my other videos. It's one component of it. However, we're going to talk about the other aspect of it, which is much less talked about, which is actually identifying the root cause. Understanding that burnout is a symptom, and in order to address the symptom, we actually need to solve the underlying root cause. So what does that mean in the context of studying and learning? Well, if we think about studying and learning, this is something that I observe very commonly in my everyday practice, is this thing that is called the black box effect. The black box effect refers to when there are things that we do not understand that are a critical part of how things work. So, for example, when it comes to studying, we understand that when we put in effort and when we put in time, and then we do this thing that is called studying, we presume that we will get this outcome, for example, our exam results. However, the black box is everything in the middle. What is happening while we are studying that converts the effort and time into the exam results? It's not just the more effort and the more time you put in, the better your results are, because then the people with the greatest results would consistently just be the people that study the most or put in the most effort. And that's not the case. There are plenty of people that are trying very hard and putting in lots of time, more than other people, that are still not getting the top results. Likewise, there are people that are putting in very little time and getting great results. I used to be The first one, putting in heaps of time to overcompensate to get the results, and now I'm the second, putting in as little time as possible, achieving actually even better results. So uncovering and opening up this black box and understanding where effort and time is wasted allows us to have more control over the outcome, because we could put in effort and time, and maybe while we are studying, in our brain, cognitively, from a learning point of view, maybe this is what's happening. And so in order for us to get that result, we need to put in so much time and effort because there's so much waste. We're going on detours, we're going back and forth, and we're not using our brain or our processes in the most efficient way. Whereas maybe we could make it a little bit more like this, and therefore get the same result, but we're translating that much more effectively across. And so opening up this black box is what allows us to have more control over the situation. And with control comes confidence, because we don't have to be anxious about whether we're going to get the exam result or not. You see, the reason that a lot of students find that they are anxious about their exams and they're not sure whether they're going to do well or not is because they don't know how this effort is going to translate into the result. They're always thinking, is this enough? Have I studied enough? What if they ask this question? What if they ask about this? I didn't study this part in depth. There's all these question marks around whether they're gonna get that result because they're not sure if the studying that they did was sufficient, because they're not even sure what boxes need to be checked in order for it to have been sufficient in the first place. And it's actually, frankly, very difficult to get a grasp of that without knowing a little bit more around how learning actually works. And so this is the thing. I preach constantly for people to learn a little bit more about the metacognition, the thinking behind the thinking, learning about learning, because it allows you to be the mechanic of your own brain. It allows you to problem solve and fix and have control. You don't have to have anxiety because it's what if this and then what if this. You know what will happen. It's predictable what the outcome is going to be because you know what it took, you know what processes are in play, and if something goes wrong, you at least know why it went wrong, rather than having an exam result, getting the result back, and then thinking, man, I thought I was going to do really well. I ticked all the boxes in my own head. However, the result is not whatever I expected. And then that's very confusing. And if you tried really hard and you spent lots of time studying for this exam, this is very demotivating and this is very frustrating. So opening up this black box allows us to influence more control here. It allows us to optimize the process. It allows us to see where we're wasting time and wasting energy and ultimately refine the system so that we're able to use our time more effectively and therefore fundamentally make it so that our results are going to be better, that we're not putting in time and effort and then being frustrated from it, and therefore it's not having a detrimental effect on our motivation. Because we're changing the approach that we're using, we are fundamentally less likely to burn out in the first place. Because if you think about it, if you imagine that you're right in there and you are traveling along this windy path to try to get to your result, how many people are going to be motivated doing that? How many people are out there that are going to be motivated going through this windy, torturous path to get to the result every single time they sit down and study? Not many. In fact, it's incredibly rare. It's weird actually to go through a process like this and actually feel hyped up and motivated and enjoying the process. The only way you can fundamentally change the game is if you change the way that you're approaching it and you change the strategies that you're using. So if you're burnt out and you're spending some time and energy doing something, yes, you can take a break, allow yourself to recover. But don't just blindly put yourself back in the same situation that created the problem in the first place. Instead, use that time, invest time into your future in changing your approach. And the way that you do that is opening up this black box. And the way you open up this black box is by learning more about how learning works. You have to understand a little bit more about the learning theory, how learning happens in the brain, and how your techniques stack up against it. But the thing is that learning is not straightforward. In fact, it's incredibly complicated. So to learn everything that you need to know about how learning works is frankly not possible for most average students. And I know someone's gonna probably write here in the comments under this video saying, so how does learning work? Well, it will probably be hundreds and hundreds of pages, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of words to write out a full report of all the ways that learning works, because it's one of the most complicated processes that we know that occurs in the human body. And as you can see here from this diagram, there are lots of components that are interacting with each other, and this is just the basic outline, and already there is a lot to go through. But just because there is an insurmountable amount that you need to know doesn't mean that you can't start the process and still gain knowledge and information that can legitimately help you right now, because you don't need to know everything to help you. You just need to know what's going to be relevant for you right now. That's a journey that all of my students running through my program are going through. So here are 3 steps that you should take if you want to never get burnt out again. First of all, and number 1, map out your learning system. What I mean by learning system is not just here's a technique, here's another technique. It's about how do the different techniques that you use complement each other to produce a singular, unified purpose. The techniques that you use during class, the way you write your notes, when you revise, how you revise and review your material, how you prepare for your exams, the techniques that you use at each of these stages should be strategic. They should complement each other. Now, for most people, they're not aware of exactly what techniques they're using. They don't know why they're using it other than the fact that someone told them to and that's what they've done in the past. But you have to be very critical about this. We have to understand what techniques are we using and why are we using it. If the only reason we're doing it is because that's what everyone says you should do, then you really need to think about that very carefully, because if you're doing the same thing that everyone else is doing, you can't really expect to get a result that everyone else isn't getting. And again, if you're really early on in your academic stages, like junior high school maybe, or like primary intermediate, then yeah, you can maybe get away with just putting in more effort and trying harder than the people around you, and yeah, you can maybe get to the top. But at a certain point, especially senior high school, university, college, especially competitive programs, and definitely so in professional life, when you're trying to aim for the top, a lot of people are trying very, very hard, and it's hard to differentiate yourself with effort alone. And if you're trying to do that, you're gonna have to sacrifice more than is necessary. I'm not saying don't work hard, but I'm saying work smart first, and then when you work hard, it's gonna be an unbeatable combination. So start off by noting down all the techniques that you use, as many as you can think of, the ones that you are actually using, obviously, not just the ones that you've heard of and have planned to use. I'm talking about the techniques that you genuinely, truly use in everyday life, from the moment you consume your first piece of information all the way through to your assessment, if you have one. And start thinking about why you use each technique that you do, and whether you know enough of the learning theory behind it to see if it's well and truly supported or not. The answer to that question for most people, for most of your techniques, will be, I don't know why I use this technique. And that is fine, because it's the beginning of the process, and you can now go on the journey of learning more about each of these techniques, and therefore you can start optimizing and modifying them. But it's perfectly normal to know absolutely nothing about this at the beginning. That's exactly where I started from as well. The only difference is I didn't have a YouTube channel where I teach the learning theory to make it easier for me to learn off of, because, you know, like time travel reasons, it's not possible. So the second thing that you want to ask yourself is not just why am I using this, but also how do each of these techniques complement each other? And again, the answer may be either that they don't complement each other or I have no idea. And again, that's fine. It just means there's lots of things for you to learn about. But on the other hand, there are that many opportunities for you to improve. The second thing you want to do is start scheduling 20 minutes every 3 days, or just twice a week during your weekdays, where you are reflecting very critically on the learning system that you're using. Now that you've mapped out the techniques, and it may take you a few weeks just to figure out what techniques you even use if you've never thought about this before. That's totally normal too. But once you've mapped it out, we need to start reflecting on how effective these techniques actually are. Are they working for us? Are they producing the desired result? At the end of using each of these techniques, what is the outcome that I expect? And what is the outcome that I actually gain from it? This is very important because it allows us to break up an entire learning system into individual components. A lot of the time, people look at their learning system as just one big chunk, and they say, it's good enough, it's working for me because I'm able to get these results. However, most of those results may be coming from just one or two components of their technique. They could capitalize on that, turn them into huge strengths, and get rid of all the rest to increase their efficiency. So it's important that we think about each component of our learning system and how that affects the outcomes that we get, because that opens up into the next thing, which is to start experimenting and reflecting on the experiments every 3 days. So now not only are we thinking about how each component interacts with each other, we're also thinking about how we can modify that component. We can learn a little bit more theory about that particular component. We can watch some of the YouTube videos uploaded by this very generous learning coach who puts things out there for free despite getting hate all over the internet, called Justin Sung. Or you could go and read some research articles and just, waste away your life like a certain YouTuber also called Justin Sung did. Or you can save yourself all of the hassle and have a nice streamlined program of development, like joining my course, where you can check out the link in the description below. Either way, however you're gonna do it, you now have certain components about your learning system that you know that you need to get more information about. So you need to go and learn more about that component. You need to learn a little bit more about the theory behind how that technique is meant to work and what result you're meant to get out of that. And as you learn more, you're gonna have more ideas on how I can modify it. Okay, so this technique is meant to activate this cognitive effect. So maybe if I, instead of writing out my notes here and then transferring it over here, maybe if I start by having an intermediate step, that will allow me to activate this cognitive effect more effectively. Okay, we can try that. And the best part about this is that there's no real risk, because you're only gonna be experimenting with 1 or 2 little ideas at any given time. Worst case scenario, you do it for a few days, it's not as effective, and you've wasted 15, 20 minutes. But if it does work, that's a game changer. That means you're one step closer to having a truly optimized, individualized learning system that is tailored for high efficiency. And so step 3 is really just bringing all of that together again and reflecting on the experiments that we've made. So step 1 and step 2 is giving us the tools and the resources to engage in this cycle of reflection and experimentation. Step 3 is about looking at the results from our experiment, feeding that into the next one and saying, okay, was that a success or was that a failure? If it worked, great, we implement that. If there was a failure, then why? How can we modify things in a different way? We could go back and we could work on a different component, or maybe we want to keep going down this particular pathway. This is the exact process that I did tens of thousands of times for several years, teaching students what I was learning and discovering as well. And that is what allowed me to create an extremely optimized learning system that allowed me to cut down my study hours from 20 hours a day down to 1 to 2 hours a day and get even better results. It's what's allowed me to finish my master's in a 1/10 of the recommended time. It's what allowed me to work full-time while studying full-time. But it's not a single step. It is the culmination of thousands and thousands of iterations. And you may say at this point, Justin, that sounds all good in theory, but it just takes too long. And you're right. It does take a long time, doesn't it? And to that, I just have to say that there's actually no alternative. You see, if you don't engage in this process, you will inevitably end up with the same results that you may have always gotten, which may be increasing stress, it's getting harder every year, you're less able to deal with the challenges every year, and you're constantly cycling in and out of burnout. Because your approach, your strategy, your method and process is inevitably leading you to that outcome. And unless you change that, you can't expect the outcome to change. And this is something that I think really characterizes someone that is successful. They're willing to do the difficult work. And the difficult work is not just putting in more hours and time. Anyone can do that. The difficult thing is the time and the effort spent on evaluating, critiquing, going through this process that other people are not willing to go through, reaching just 1% gains every single day, until you get to the point where you can look back and you realize you're at the top of the mountain while everyone else hasn't even bothered to start climbing because it looks too high. If you think it's going to take too long, it just means you should have started earlier. Some students that I work with will hear a message like this and they will still put it off for a few years. And then once they've racked up enough regret, They will then engage in this process, and it's still going to take them just as long. All they did is waste a few years in between. Now, do you have to engage in this process? No. You can succeed without engaging in this process if you are extremely, extremely lucky. And I'm talking like you were selected by the universe, like you are, like the Neo of the world. We're living in a simulation. You're the one that's going to set us free. If you're that person, the once in a generation genius, that just the stars align for, then you probably don't need to do much to succeed. But for all of us mere mortals who don't want to rely on having universe level luck and plot armor, we probably need to engage in a safer process, and that is this. And now, I know that this might seem quite logical and intuitive for you to do, but you also might be a little bit skeptical or cautious because it's a new method of tackling something like burnout that other people don't often talk about. And you'll probably realize if you watch my other videos that I tend to talk about things in a different way, and frankly, that's just because I live and breathe this stuff. It's literally my job to work with people to solve issues like this. And there's a lot of things that I've realized from my years of experience. So let's talk now to a couple of students that have been in your type of situation before and get a perspective on how this type of approach changed things for them. So that you don't have to just believe me, you can see it from other people that have been in your exact situation. But before that, I mentioned my program. So if you're interested in learning this type of stuff, as well as a lot of other strategies for learning more effectively, managing your time, procrastinating less, developing more self-management skills, an end-to-end process, all those little things that I went through years and thousands of iterations of trial and error to figure out, packaged neatly in a way that you can learn and develop for yourself, then check the link. You can join my full program. It's an entire guided incubation program that is designed to fundamentally retrain the way that you think and approach different tasks like studying, like time management, like task management and prioritization, so that you can become a little bit more efficient. I can guarantee you it is going to be the fastest way for you to make long-lasting, transformative changes that stay after you're finished, that don't require you to constantly be coming back to a course or asking someone questions how to do something. It's about producing a change that's going to last. But anyway, let's now see what these students have to say.
So throughout high school, I definitely observed a lot of friends who would study a lot and grind endlessly in order to achieve a certain goal. And I noticed that a lot of them didn't necessarily know what processes they were using or what techniques they were actually experimenting with to get to that, particular goal. And what I saw was a lot of people would pretty much lose motivation. They would, take a break, as many people say, but then it didn't necessarily get them better or better equipped to actually, face the goal, because it basically made, like, they were basically doing the same thing again. So nothing really changed. Whereas I guess for me, like initially, like I wasn't actually that successful for like pursuing my personal goals. But then like after I kind of learned more about like how learning works and like how like, life kind of works in terms of productivity, I was able to kind of improve and reflect upon my experiences more. And that meant that I was able to essentially produce like a better version of myself every single cycle of reflection and experimentation. So eventually I was able to be like a much better equipped learner and more able to tackle my particular goals than I was like a year ago, let's say, from starting the goal.
Well, I guess it's like a similar thing for me as well. A lot of my friends would kind of run into the same thing and problem, and then it would kind of like repeat and repeat. But I think one of the things that worked very well for me is that when it comes to finding a solution to a problem, I definitely don't want to be doing the same thing again. But the really ironic thing is like in the people who were kind of, often being the person who burnt out, they'd always repeat and do the exact same thing. So when it comes to kind of like this approach where, always reflecting on how you can improve yourself each day, that's something that I specifically did even just in my year 12 and year 11 experience, because I really don't want to be doing the exact same thing, because that just has a higher chance of having the same kind of result as well. In year 9, I started to realize that I really wanted to get higher grades. And so I did the typical thing of just like study your guts away, essentially. And so year 10, I basically studied every minute outside of extracurriculars and co-curriculars and such. I didn't really play video games much anymore, and that was something that I really enjoyed. And by the end of it, I got the grades that I wanted, and it was eventually became ducks. But then I quickly realized that for the amount of effort that I had to kind of put in to make that possible, it kind of really wasn't being reflected so much in my results. Like I was still getting, high A's and A pluses, but I was really expecting just, kind of get near top all marks and all A pluses. And so essentially what happened is by the end of the whole year, because everything was kind of riding on the end of year exams as well, essentially straight after the exams were done, I was just like fully exhausted. And I still remember that kind of the week afterwards, my parents were genuinely concerned because every other holidays and such, I'd try to just go ahead and play video games. But in this instance, I was basically just trying to sleep and like pass time for as long as I could until I guess my results came back, which is something that I haven't really experienced much of before. But that kind of told me that, looking at year 11 and year 12, I had to do something different entirely. Otherwise, it was just going to be like way worse. A lot of the time when you do actually get the results you wanted to get so badly, it becomes overwhelming. And that kind of added to the feelings that I had in year 10, where it's like, oh, I got it, but there was so much at expense for that to occur, making it just overwhelming in general, underwhelming as well.
So I think for myself, I was one of those students that really annoyed the rest of my batch because it seemed like I wasn't studying as much as they were. My classmates really worked very hard, putting in lots of hours of study. And here I was seemingly fooling around and getting as good or even better grades. And the thing that actually affected me quite a lot was when a lot of people made comments. Although it seemed like I wasn't putting in as much effort, and most of the time I'll be getting good grades, there were plenty of occasions where I didn't get those good grades. And it felt quite unsettling because I couldn't explain why. I couldn't explain why I was getting good grades, and I had no idea why it wasn't working. So having that black box of not knowing where I went wrong or where I even went right was a bit troubling to know because I had no idea what to do or where to go from here. That's why when I started learning about how learning actually works and seeing in theory where I might have gone wrong or what actually might have led to the success, it actually helped me to produce more consistent results rather than just like flipping a coin and praying that somehow I get good results.